On behalf of all of MHASF, I'm so excited to welcome you all to RCC 2025. So before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone people, who have been stewards of this land for generations. We honor their ongoing connection to this land and the enduring contributions of their ancestors. Perfect, now let's get started. We have an absolutely incredible lineup of speakers, workshops, and activities planned for you all over the next couple of days. We're really here to challenge stigmas, elevate conversations around mental health, and build a stronger, more resilient community. So here to help us kick off our conference is MHASF's own CEO, Mark Salazar.
Is this the clicker? I think it is. All right, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Kate, and welcome to this year's annual conference. But before I begin, I'd like to start with a few tasks that I've been asked to do. One is I have to do a selfie with everybody, so here we go. I'm not the best at this, so hey, there you go. I did my task. That's one. Okay, the second thing is if I ask everyone here if you could take out your phones. Okay, everybody got their phones? Okay, I'd like for everyone to take a selfie. All right. Make it fun, make it silly, make it whatever you want. All right, everybody got their selfie? All right, if you could with your selfie, upload it to your social media and tag MHASF and tag the RCC conference. All right. So you don't have to do it now, but if you could do it later, that'd be great. All right. So, since we have everybody's phones out, the third thing I have to do is actually if you could scan that QR code. And the reason I'm asking you to do that, because we are campaigning to refund our warm line. If you don't want to scan the QR code, you could use your Internet Explorer and type in savethewarmline.org. Does anyone still use Internet Explorer? No? All right. I don't even think it exists anymore. It's what, Microsoft Edge or whatever? All right. So if you could, lend us your voice. Visit the website, savethewarmline.org. Sign our petition. Call the governor. Email the governor. Email your assembly members and your senators. That would be great. All right. So I will request a list for all registrants, and then I'll check off everybody's name as I look through the petition, okay? All right. Okay, now I'm gonna actually try this. Okay, so speaking of voices, voices and words are very powerful tools. For better or for worse, our words can affect lives. Let's take the word crazy. For generations, crazy was the label pinned on folks who didn't fit the narrative. It's been used to put down and shame folks who didn't conform to what is considered normal. Today, we continue to try to flip that script. Our theme, Redefining Crazy, Rewriting the Rules. It's an invitation, it's a call to action. We're rewriting the rules because they were made without input from the people that it impacted most. Instead, here, we will center the lives of folks with lived experience so that next time when we draft mental health policy, it's written with and by folks who are affected. But headwinds blow just as strong. Across the country, new court-mandated programs have expanded involuntary commitment laws. On paper, they help, but in practice, they widen surveillance and force compliance. They siphon energy from community-driven voluntary services. Sorry. Now add to that funding cuts at the federal level, right? And you know by who, right? Does anyone recognize this guy? Yeah. All right. Thanks to people like him, we are changing the entire landscape. So here we are, a fork in the road. Progress in one hand, the grip of coercion in the other. We know what works. We know what we need, and so we have to decide the future. But we already know what the path is. They need care, not coercion. Why is there a spam calling me? Sorry. We need care, not coercion. So, throughout the state, throughout the country, communities and organizations like ours are standing up. We're refusing to wait for top-down fixes. Communities are working together to deliver supplies and aid during disasters, community warm lines preventing police dispatches, and housing advocates are winning eviction limits. Let's look what happens when we invest in community-led services that people choose. Since 2019, the Warm Line has served over 500,000 calls, texts, and chats. That's about 100,000 every year. The Warm Line alone this year has served over 20,000 people. That's through over 200,000 calls, texts, and chats. Three out of 5 of the callers report that they have an immediate drop in distress after one conversation. Proof that empathy outperforms the ER. Every year, we estimate that 14,000 calls are prevented from going to the ER, saving the state roughly $93 million. That is a lot of money. Impressive, right? But the Warm Line isn't just a story, it's our blueprint for the next 3 days. We will scale this work together. We will weave together policy, practice, lived experience, and culture in our conversations. Panels on intergenerational trauma will sit next to legal clinics on tenants' rights. Workshops on neurodiversity will share airtime with folks with hoarding disorder. Today, Angela Davis will remind us about the importance of community when building a mental health system. Tomorrow's Skywatchers, based from the Tenderloin, will combine power of and the art of personal stories to amplify neighborhood wisdom and to advance social justice. And on Friday, Jenny Yang will prove that a laugh can puncture stigma faster than any law can. Different vantage points, but the same mission. Truth. So to do the work, we'll need a space. We will need to listen and understand, not to convert. We will need to honor our identities and then disrupt harm when you see it. So here's our playbook. Rewrite, resist, reimagine. Again, rewrite, resist, and reimagine. Rewrite the stories we tell so survival isn't mistaken for sickness. Resist the policies that criminalize when calling it care. Reimagine systems that someone chooses, not commodified. At every session, ask whose rule is this, who benefits, and who is missing from the room. So I invite you to carry a little curiosity and a little unruliness to every session. Let's hold space for stories that expose how diagnosis, gender, race, disability, and poverty intersect. And let's imagine something freer. All right, so before I close, I want to thank our MHASF team spread out through the conference. I want to especially thank Kate Sievers and Seth Wong, if you could stand up, our main leads. Get your flowers. I want to thank everyone for being here and who's made this conference possible. So I hope people recognize what this symbol is. This today is where hope begins. By rewriting the rules today, we are choosing a hopeful future. The one where our communities are standing up and resisting the dystopian actions happening all across the country. To quote this movie or show, rebellions are built on hope. Have a great conference, everybody. All right, I want to welcome Dr. David Elliott Lewis. He's our board president and peer educator for a few remarks. Thank you, David.
It's an honor to be here. I play many roles. I started many years ago with the Mental Health Association, 15 years ago. But I want to talk briefly about what I was all about before I met the Mental Health Association. And Mark was with them at that time, too. So before, I was living in an SRO room. I was cut off from society, voluntarily cut off. I was depressed, anxious, suffering from, you might say, a mental health condition. Without help, without intervention, separated from society. And in that period of time, end of 2009, beginning of 2010, I met somebody, an educator from Mental Health Association in San Francisco, who told me they have a program, a peer educator program, where they train you to share your story and help fight stigma. I thought, well, why should I do this? Maybe I'll help other people. I had no idea I'd be helping myself by doing it. I joined this program called SOLVE, Sharing Our Lives, Voices, and Experiences, SOLVE, SOLVE. And I'll tell you, if you ever want to learn about yourself, try explaining yourself to other people. You want to learn a new skill, try teaching that skill to someone else. So, in the next 15 years, I learned about myself. I moved out of the SRO room. I lifted myself up. I rebuilt my life. I recovered from depression. I'm still in recovery. But I actually attribute a lot of it to the Mental Health Association of San Francisco, which helped give me that first step up out of self-decline, self-deprivation, self-neglect. I am so grateful. And I've found a community of peers, people with lived experience who are also rebuilding their lives. This is an incredible organization. I have such mad respect. Some years back, I joined the board, but even before I joined the board, I was a volunteer for this agency, helping them out because I believed in the cause. And what a cause it is. I mean, offering a warm line to help people where they're at before they get to the point of crisis. Hotlines are important. Hotlines are staffed by volunteers, just not necessarily people with lived experience, just volunteers. That's fine. But the warm line is staffed by a paid staff with people with lived experience, many of which are certified peer educators, and that's important. They're actually trained in how to be peer counselors, and they provide an invaluable help, free help throughout the state of California to lift people up. They've lifted me up. They've lifted so many probably people in this room up. The Warm Line, we can't say enough of they're like unsung heroes. I want to give a shout out to the Warm Line. Thank you, Warm Line. There's something else that I had once suffered from but overcame thanks to the Mental Health Association. I was at one time an overcollector, and it actually threatened my ability to maintain my apartment. Overcollecting, hoarding and cluttering. It's a solvable condition. And Mental Health Association provided me help, hands-on help, workshops, classes, buried in treasures, guidance, support groups to help figure out how to overcome this issue of overcollecting. And it's an overcomable issue. And if it's not addressed, it leads to eviction. It leads to homelessness. So isn't it better to prevent homelessness than try to treat it after the fact? Right? This is what the Mental Health Association does. I am such just a big fan. I'm one of their #1 fans. I serve as their board president. I also help lead co-facilitate a group with the police department called Crisis Intervention Team Mental Health Working Group. We were created by the Police Commission to advise the police department on crisis response. And since we've been working with this group, we have gotten police shootings way down. In the past, I mean, in the past, you waved the gun at an officer, you waved the knife at an officer, the outcome was usually fatal. Now, they talk them down. They create time, distance, and rapport. Isn't that amazing? They save lives rather than take them. They don't rush to judgment. They rush to collaborate and communicate and de-escalate. And all police officers have now, most of them have received this training and received support from the crisis intervention team. It's a huge help. So, with that, I just want to say I have huge gratitude to Mark Salazar, our leader of CEO. Incredible leader. And now I have the honor to introduce one of my own personal heroes for decades, more than half a century, Angela Davis. Angela Davis, welcome. Thank you. Yeah, come on up.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start my stopwatch to help me keep time here. Hello. My name is Raina Daniels. I'm the Associate Director of Strategic Partnerships for MHASF. I use they, them, and she, her pronouns. And I'm going to guide our conversation today with Angela Davis. We're not going to be able to applaud after every question in order to move the conversation forward, but I will do my best to express our gratitude as a whole. Angela Y. Davis is a professor emerita of history of consciousness and feminist studies at UC Santa Cruz, an activist, writer, and lecturer. Her work focuses on prisons, police, abolition, and the related intersections of race, gender, and class. She is the author of many books, from Angela Davis, an autobiography, to Freedom is a Constant Struggle. Related to David Elliott Lewis's last comments, we know that successes in police training and other decarceration efforts have impacted or benefited some communities over others, and we will hopefully touch on those throughout our conversation today. Professor Davis, Dr. Davis, you have parented the minds and hearts of so many of us. You have changed the lives, literally, of people I love and people in our collective families. Sound check, sound check. Did they give you a dead mic? Hilarious.
Let me make sure it's working before. Yes, it's
Wonderful.
working. Can everyone hear me?
I'm going to trade with you. Yes.
This is fine. Yeah, this is fine. You can hear me now, right?
I won't make a Pilates joke about your arm strength. I'm going to say it again. You have parented the minds and hearts of so many of us and so many people I love and people in our collective families, and it is just such a deep honor and opportunity to be able to thank you directly to your face, and I think that we can give a big applause if that resonates with you.
Well, before we move on, I must say that I've never done anything of significance individually. It's always been in conjunction with others. Probably one of the themes of the conversation is going to be the need to recognize and struggle against individualism. We're all in this together.
I'm going to launch into questions. Mariame Kaba talks about the expansion of the somewhere else. Somewhere that it's not prison, but it is prison by any other name. And I'm going to pull a quote from an interview with Myra Shenwar, the co-author of a book of that title, Prison by Any Other Name. Under the logic of our prison nation, people cannot simply be freed, with the shrinking or closing of prisons. Instead, they need to be put in some other restrictive, coercive institution, even if that institution purports to help them. A kinder, gentler cage. Electronic monitoring, confining people to their homes is a somewhere else. Psychiatric hospitals are a somewhere else. Locked-down drug treatment centers are a somewhere else. These are still places to put people who have been deemed criminal, to remove them from larger society. Is it your shared perspective that forced psychiatric treatment and institutionalization is another arm of the prison industrial complex? Can you share with how you think that's understood by abolitionists in your circles and your reflections on somewhere else?
Okay, thank you so much for the question, but I think we have to begin properly. And I haven't yet thanked you for inviting me to participate in this session with all of you. So let me thank the Mental Health Association of San Francisco for the work that you've been doing and for allowing me to witness a small part of that work. So the question, I was looking at some of the information online about the conference and the instantiations of the conference over the last few years, and I understand that last year was the first year that the conference took place in person.
Just since COVID.
Since COVID, yes. And I was really impressed by the theme then. Of course, redefining crazy, but it's the system, not the people. And I think that theme will probably carry through all of the conferences. So I just want to emphasize that we're not talking about individual difficulties as much, but we are, of course we are. But the individual difficulties emerge against the backdrop of a system, socioeconomic, political system that is not designed to support people. It is designed to support profit. And capitalism is also a system that urges all of us to imagine ourselves only as individuals, not as parts of larger collectives. So in case I don't use the word capitalism, which I probably will, but I just, I want us to have this basic understanding that we're not talking about trying to create small changes while ignoring the larger problem, while ignoring the fact that ultimately, if we're ever going to achieve what we want, a world without hunger, a world without houselessness, a world in which everyone has the opportunity to fulfill themselves, then that means we're going to have to do something about the reign of capitalism. So keep that in mind. Yes. And so therefore, when we talk about these issues of incarceration of people who have mental health issues, let's recognize that we're not focusing myopically on a single problem. We're thinking about it in terms of what the system itself has promoted. And I was just thinking that in my effort to try to understand how we came to have this massive system of incarceration. The US is still the country in the world where more people are behind bars than anywhere else. Yeah, and reflecting on the history of mass incarceration, if you will, we have to recognize that the history of this system of incarceration involves incarcerating virtually everyone who has gone against what is considered to be normal in the society. And so the prehistory of these institutions that we call jails and prisons and psychiatric institutions involve workhouses, involve incarcerating people because of their poverty, involve incarcerating people because of their disabilities, whether physical or mental or emotional. And as a matter of fact, they used to not make a distinction between who was a, quote, criminal, who was mentally ill, who had no capacity to support themselves. They had poorhouses. All of you have heard about poorhouses, right? They had poorhouses and workhouses and all of these systems of incarceration that were designed to remove from the larger society those who did not satisfy the norm. So let's keep that in mind. Even as systems of incarceration became more and more specialized, it was against the backdrop of this assumption that you're supposed to be a certain way, you're supposed to act a certain way, you're supposed to be of a certain racial background, you're supposed to be of a certain gender background in order to be considered, quote, normal. Having said that, I would absolutely agree with Miriam Kaba. Yes, we can't assume that the only way to end what we call the prison industrial complex is simply to get rid of the institutions that we call prisons. We get rid of the institutions that we call prisons, and then there are other carceral institutions. What about immigrant detention facilities? What about the family policing system? Dorothy Roberts, calls the child, what is it? Yeah, Child Protective Services. She suggests that instead of saying Child Protective Services, we should say the family policing system.
You said it the first time, yes.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. So there are many other forms of incarceration, and they're all interlinked. They're all connected, and there's a reason why they have all emerged under conditions of capitalism.
Thank you.
Racism. Transphobia.
Thank you.
And patriarchy, absolutely.
You're not just stalling for me, I know.
I want my man, he's in prison.
I'm going to jump. Is it all right if I jump around, or are you prepared to answer in sequence? No. Great. I'm going to jump forward to question what we called 3, and then come back again. About success stories. That many of us have seen genuine positive intent from legislators and clinical care designers that is grounded in this complex and nuanced understanding of the failings of the current system. And many times this openness to incorporating feedback from consumers, from people, is grounded in their own experience of having a friend or family member, someone else in their lives who has been reliant on these systems or impacted by these systems. And more often than not, this is not their own lived experience. but this might be a passion inspired. And, many times this person may have died or lost contact with them. And it's their own taking action from this sense of understanding or this projection that fuels their involvement. And what we see sometimes is those efforts are oftentimes also aided by the stories of those who have been impacted by carceral systems, people who have been incarcerated, whose success stories are elevated and platformed and paraded in a way that overshadows the stories of people who have been harmed who are calling for abolition. And that can weaponize the experience of survivors in reforms. And simultaneously, we as peers, none of us want to discredit the authentic healing of another person. And those people who do credit imprisonment or forced care or forced treatment, their lived experience is also valid. So how do you hold the tension between these things when success stories are elevated or platformed in order to perpetuate the continuation of harmful or systems and services? Yes, yeah, I think that's it. The success stories for whom the system works or has worked.
Well, yeah, it's complicated, as your question indicates, because there are people who end up behind bars for whatever reason. And they discover new possibilities, not so much because of the system itself, not at all because of the system itself, largely because they come into contact with other people who have tried to make something of their lives. For example, vast numbers of people who end up going to prison haven't had an education and therefore don't really even know how to read. And so that becomes the only conditions under which they feel impelled to improve themselves. Because if not, if you can't really learn how to lead the life of the mind when you're behind bars, you may as well give up everything. That's not because of the system itself. It's because of those who challenge the system. It's because of those who are determined to make something of themselves despite the fact that a prison system that is racist and sexist and homophobic does not care at all about what happens to those whom it traps inside. So I would answer that question by saying, well, yeah, there are some people who, as a consequence of being sent to prison, figure out a way to begin to make a life for themselves. But let's not place responsibility for that on the shoulders of the system that is so determined to destroy their lives. That happens despite the way in which the carceral system is organized. I have a cousin who recently got out of prison after spending 38 years. And he was involved in the gang life in LA, and he's someone who would say that his encounter with restorative justice and other programs in prison helped him not only to save his own life, but to save others' lives as well. Mm-hmm. But he would certainly not say that the carceral system as it exists is responsible for his success. And we have to learn how to be a little bit more nuanced in the way we think. Unfortunately, we live at a time when nuance is not regarded as something important, particularly when we have the kind of person in the office of the presidency who does not even read. I think that particularly at this moment, it's really important to think. And you don't have to have acquired a university education to think deeply. As a matter of fact, I think some of the smartest people in this country are behind walls today.
Thank you. I think I was listening to a lecture from Dean Spade recently in which I think he called into question what services are those within a prison system that have actually benefited and created those changes that folks credit with recovery of any kind. And talking about literacy programs, for example, are so often actually not part of the program of incarceration and are provided by mutual aid and volunteer groups from outside that could easily have been providing those services in community prior to incarceration and in other settings had they not been left to this circumstance of imprisonment.
Are also developed by the people who are incarcerated themselves.
Yes.
They've done so much of the work of rehabilitation, which the system itself has not succeeded in doing.
Thank you. Yes. Yes, I think that when we think about the combination of peer service work and the access to paid positions for peers in our community. This is something that our organization and so many others continue to echo, that these are roles that people deserve compensation for, or a formal way to make their lives possible, to make their ends meet while performing peer work. And we think about who is available for those roles. This goes, in my mind, hand in hand with decarceration work because of the incredible work, the incredible peer support, the incredible mental health practitioners and educators and community workers who right now are behind bars and unable to participate actively in these communities that we know their lived experience would be the most transformative for us to touch in community. I think when you're talking about this evolution into detention centers for fully expanding, more deeply expanding, and thinking about how the federal government is stripping these services, I have this question about good cops or good people in broken systems, that I think the question really is, what faith do you have that everyday workers in these institutions can continue to push back against harmful policies and practices that are inside those institutions? So I'll step back. The question really is reflecting on your own experience of incarceration and seeing how there were jailers, court workers, medical workers, folks involved in the system who were reflecting back some degree of solidarity with you, making your imprisonment perhaps just slightly less painful, or having some amount of solidarity reflected to you from workers within. This got my mind turning around this question of there being people who are willing to bend the rules of the system, give an extra meal or an extra serving to someone, make sure that they do have an extra blanket, even if that's not part of the rules. These rule benders and breakers are oftentimes credited with having made our stays in institutions just slightly better than the state demands. And as the state continues to demand worse and worse conditions for so many of our community, do you have any idea about how acts of humanity and defiance within these state systems can continue on? Is there room for humanity in the state of surveillance and military contracting and expanded services?
Well, let me see. You know, I'm someone who believes that people are basically good. And that much of what is so destructive about the world that we live in has happened because people have been trained in certain ways. People have been forced to act in certain ways, to live up to certain stereotypes. You know, but on the other hand, I don't think I would congratulate people who are in those positions for their small acts of mercy. You know, because I would think that as human beings, that is what they are supposed to do. That should not be extraordinary. And I know exactly, you know, what you're talking about. I experienced it, where, you know, some of the guards were very nice and treated me and people around me in a way in which we should have been treated. Although, of course, we should never have been under those circumstances in the first place. But I do have a story about the way in which the systems can ultimately win. And that is about, let's see, I was in a jail in Marin County, in San Rafael at that time. And there was this guard who had just been hired. So she hadn't yet learned how to inhabit the role of the prison guard. And I remember awaiting the times when she would be on. It was a small jail, right, in the evenings, because that meant I was in solitary confinement. But it meant that I could have conversations with the other women. We would yell. I was on one side of the jail. They were in a more communal situation, but we were able to have conversations. And she was the only one on, so she allowed us to do that. So that's exactly what you're talking about, right? Okay. That was good at the time. Okay, my trial happens. I end up going to other jails and, you know, other courtrooms, and then after a while, I'm found, you know, not guilty. I get out. And I go back to the same courthouse because I'm attending the trial of the Soledad brothers. And this nice woman, I'll never forget, she had long blonde hair. She was, you know, very sweet during the time I was there, when she was learning how to do that work. And I had to go through the, you know, metal detector, and in those days they were also searching your hair if you had a big natural. And so I saw her and I smiled. Not a flicker of recognition. She went on to put her hands in my hair, as if everyone who wore a natural could carry a gun in their hair. And this was maybe 10 months later, or a year later, and I realized that the institution had won. She had been thoroughly institutionalized. She had been thoroughly transformed into the prison guard. And unfortunately, that's the story that we usually see in terms of guards and police and you know, so many other positions that are designed to exert power and force over other human beings. So I think that the system has to change, and then they will be compelled to change. I don't think they're going to lead us in any kind of systemic change. But, it's okay. They should be, while they're doing that work, they should try to be human beings. That is what they're supposed to do. But let's not congratulate them for acting the way they should be.
Thank you. I'll jump back there into this question about engaging with that system, about specifically about emergency dispatching for crises. So when we think about the action of someone who's considering contacting the police, either directly or maybe through their work with 988 or a crisis line that's linked to emergency response or police dispatch, we do often assume that that person has a good faith concern for the welfare of someone else, and that they feel a sense of loss about what to do to help that person de-escalate, to either not hurt themselves or someone else. And I put that in quotes because there is this idea that folks have to do something active. So prior to the Black Lives Matter movement and uprising, there was this narrative in some communities and not others, of course, that emergency services might actually act on the welfare of an individual and not also lead to a risk of abuse or trauma or incarceration and potentially death. And that persisted in the media, but thank you to you and so many other activists and academics who work to reclaim the narrative of policing and state violence for decades, but specifically following the very public murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, Sonia Massey, Tamir Rice, so many others. The risks now of involving the police seem undeniable, especially for criminalized communities, and they've been widely broadcast. How would you share your perception of the tide turning towards now unarmed mobile crisis response?
Well, I really wish it were obviously turning in that direction. I think, let me put it this way. As someone who's been involved in social justice struggles for virtually all of my life, for virtually all of my 80-some-odd years,
Thank God.
I've seen these moments where we claim victory, and we think we're moving forward, but then there's the what you might call the counter-revolutionary force that overtakes us. And it doesn't mean that we stop. It means that we have to be dedicated in many ways to keep on fighting the same fight. I really wish that we had won that struggle, so that people who are experiencing mental health episodes would not have to fear being killed by the person who is sent to help them. That is just so ridiculous. But unfortunately, as long as we rely on policing as it exists, or policing with its long history of racism, with its history of violence and repression, and the idea that we can transform police departments into empathetic, teams of people who care about the fate of those who are experiencing sometimes very severe mental health episodes. That's not going to work, because the police are always trained first and foremost to use force. That is the nature of the police. I mean, that is why I think that we have to continue to call for modes of response that do not involve the police. Once the police get involved, their response of first resort is violence. And so, yeah, you know, we imagine that that as exists in some places, of course. I think you're absolutely right to emphasize the ways in which people who are trained to be empathetic, people who are trained to, I mean, it's not even a question of de-escalating, it's a question of helping people. You know, helping people who are in crisis. And oftentimes that crisis gets expressed in ways that can be misinterpreted. And so it's, you know, it's about abolishing the police, really. And recognizing that the police are stopgap measures designed to respond to problems that would be much better solved if groups like the police were not involved at all. And you know, when you think about people who are in mental health crises, why don't we have mental health services to begin with? Why does it have to come to that? Yes. You know, you think about houselessness. Why do we have houselessness to begin with? Everybody should have the right to live under certain conditions. Rents, home prices should not be what they are. That is really all about profit. This society is completely organized incorrectly. If it were organized in order to provide services to human beings, we would not have these problems to begin with. But that means we have to imagine a very different kind of society. Yes. We can't assume that things are going to work by changing something here and something there and leaving the system itself intact. It's the system, not the people.
Yes. We were talking in our Warmline Federation group, in our group of leaders from warmlines all over California that serve specific communities and populations and in languages, about the role of collective work. And as you're describing it, so many of our programs, we are triaging the damage of this system. We are acting as an alternative to these services that are so harmful and dangerous. And also, we discussed this opportunity with connecting with people all over the state around their mental health concerns as peers, of talking through collective action, of moving people towards system reform, and the opportunity we have then to build this different system together, or at least inspire some version of hope that collective advocacy can move us forward. And yet, as you said, we wish also that mobile crisis was fully not enmeshed with the police, and also so many of these services are actually embedded, that the existence of a mobile crisis response team might still be in connection with an armed officer on site. And we saw just this month, last month, with the slaughter of Ryan Gaynor and Victor Perez in San Bernardino, that seeking help for others, especially for families of people with disabilities, with psychiatric disabilities, developmental disabilities, any kind of disability that impacts their communication, that those calls for external crisis intervention may result in the murder of that person. And so I think my general question, which again is more solutions-oriented and not philosophical for you, is about how can we break and interrupt this relationship, this continued reliance on structures of harm when we're faced with a family member, a community member who's in need of support.
Well, sometimes we have to be able to live inside contradictions, as opposed to feeling compelled to choose one alternative over the other. Mm-hmm. We have to learn how to hold them both in tension. And so, that means that that we understand why people call the police. Mm-hmm. Who else is there to call? Yeah. I mean, it's always about desperation. Many people call the police when they don't want to call the police because they understand the history of the police. But we don't have anything else in place. Mm-hmm. And as a matter of fact, it seemed like we were moving in a really positive direction during the pandemic, when so many people all over the country demonstrated against racism and recognized the systemic character of racism. And they could see that the people who were dying were the essential workers, right? You remember that? Who were people of color, who were indigenous people and black people and Asian American people. It was, as a matter of fact, there was this moment where you remember when millions of people were in the streets and when more people were out protesting racism than had ever before happened in this country. Mm-hmm. That was a new beginning. Mm-hmm. And so many people had hope then. But then, of course, there are those who want to push us in a backwards direction. There are those who don't want to see us move forward. And I don't think I have to give you some examples of their names here this afternoon. But what I will say is that the ultra-right has been examining the social justice movements for many decades now. And they knew exactly what to do. They attacked education. They began to talk about critical race theory, which is an amazing set of theories and methodologies that lawyers and others have used. They began to demonize it. They began to attack the trans movement, as if everything that is wrong in this country can be attributed to trans people who have actually given us hope in the relative success of challenging the prevalence of gender in such a strict manner. The trans movement is responsible for so many people thinking more deeply, so many people challenging those aspects of our society that they had hitherto considered to be absolutely indispensable and absolutely normal. And that's revolutionary. But unfortunately, I think while those of us who represent the future, who are on the right side of history, let me put it that way, we're able to capture the imaginations of the majority of people in this country. The problem is we don't have the economic power. We don't have the political power. And this is why the situation was reversed, so to speak. But, you know, it's always that way. It's always 2 steps forward, 1 step backward. 3 steps forward, 4 steps backward. History is not linear in the way we want it to be. And so, therefore, I think that we're still in a moment where we have the opportunity, especially given the way what's-his-name has been acting and what did you say, Billy? Donnie Boy. This is Miss Billy Cooper, who's a leader in the trans movement, who's here. And so, I mean, I know that we're going to have to end soon, but I do want to emphasize how important it is to think in a capacious way.
We still have 10 minutes, so please.
I just want to get this in case the 10 minutes passes and I have not said it. And so we have to allow ourselves to think in a capacious manner. Think about the larger situation. Remember that it's not just about those of us who are inhabiting this earth at this moment. You know, to think about the fact that we would not be here doing this work if it were not for those who came before us, who insisted on struggling. So it's our responsibility to create a legacy of struggle that others will take up, so that down the line, who knows how many years, 10, 50, 100, and of course we have to guarantee that the earth still remains, so that means we all have to do the work of becoming involved in the care of this planet. We cannot allow those who want to exploit it and then take off and colonize Mars to win. So the point that I'm making, let's think about these large issues. Let's think about the relevance of what's happening in Palestine right now to the work that we're doing to assist those who are in crisis, in mental health crisis. The same thing often happens to Palestinians in Israel who are suffering the kinds of crisis that can lead the police to take lives. And many of the police have been trained by the IDF, by the Israeli Defense Force. So let's try to, even though we can't address specifically all of these issues, let's try to imagine ourselves as a part of a much, much larger, much more complicated state of affairs.
Thank you.
Okay, I said it.
Yes. Thank you. I would love to take that segue to also call into the room the really incredible work of the Trans Lifeline and their Safe Hotlines project. Also the current work that ATPT, the Anti-Police Terror Project, is making, and the work of our partners through the Federation of Call Blackline. Vanessa is here. Yeah, you are. The way in which these organizations have modeled mutual aid and absolutely no non-consensual active rescue policies through their work. Providing telephone support has been inspiration to our own program adopting said policies and working with our other Federation partners to just imagine what that would look like to provide support without contact, without non-consensual contact. I think you touch on this in terms of just deepening our involvement to struggle, or our connection to struggle and movement for the next generation. That was echoed by our partners at the Red Line this morning, talking about their long-term view of the work that we're doing here. And also, when the rubber hits the road, involving oneself in organizing and activism can be a very intimidating and anxiety-producing and exhausting effort. I would love your thoughts on folks who are managing or living with also legitimate concerns about surveillance, paranoia, concerns about abduction and incarceration as a result of political action. Do you have recommendations for mental health advocates who want to stretch their comfort zone into more politicized action?
I was just thinking about a book that I read many, many years ago when I was a graduate student in Europe. It was a book by Ralph Lane called The Divided Self, and it was a critique of the existing services for people who were normally the clients of the whole psychiatric industrial complex, if you will. And he was writing about one of his patients. This was in the 1960s, who a young woman who was convinced that the H-bomb was inside of her body. And what he argued was that while people thought she was absolutely crazy, she was probably the sanest person around because she experienced the danger of this bomb in a way that was connected not only to her survival, but the survival of everyone else. And so he argued that, oftentimes taking what are considered to be delusions seriously can teach us something about the nature of the society in which we live. And I never forgot that. And then when I myself ended up going to jail, I was placed in the section of the jail in New York, the Women's House of Detention, that was reserved for people who were considered to be mentally or psychiatrically off balance. So I was in, one of those cells, and they tried to give me medication. Even everybody knew who I was. By that time, everybody knew who I was. That wasn't a very good feeling on my part. But they tried to give me chlorosine. And I realized that everyone in the psych area was receiving that medication.
Across the board.
Across the board.
Uh-huh.
And then I began to later study the history of incarceration and the ways in which people constructed as male have often been viewed as criminals whereas people constructed as female have been viewed as having psychiatric problems. And there's a long, long history of that. So it means that we have to think very differently about these issues. We have to not focus so myopically on the problems that we think the individual has,
Yes.
and to look at the issues a little more broadly. And what do people who have psychiatric difficulties have to teach us?
Yes.
Maybe that's where we go wrong. That like the young woman with the atomic bomb inside of her, maybe she was the one who was telling us what we need to do. And so, I think that everyone should be involved in political struggle in one way or another. Not everyone needs to do the same thing, but I think we should view struggle as a collective process. Not everyone can risk what other people can.
Yes.
For example, we know now, given the situation regarding, all of the people who, without citizenship papers, who have been trying to speak out in solidarity with Palestine and what is happening with them, being sent to detention facilities, the threat of being deported to places that have nothing to do with their lives. So, all of which is to say, I think we need to think collectively. Some of us can risk more. Some of us can get arrested. Some of us can go to jail.
Yes.
But we also need to be able to protect those who cannot risk going to jail, because it might mean the end of their lives in many different ways. So I guess what I would say is, let's stop thinking about ourselves so much as individuals. When we think about surveillance, we think about how we as individuals are at risk. How do we shift the focus and think about how we're all at risk? And some of us can do certain things, and some of us have to be in the background, because if those of us who have the greatest risk end up being picked up, it might mean the end of their lives,
Yes.
of their children's lives. So I would, think about that in that kind of sense too. I think I said in the beginning that I would talk a lot about individualism, didn't I? Did I say that too?
Yes.
And this is one example where it really works to shift the focus from the single person to all of us. We're all in this together. And looking at what one individual may or may not be able to do is not so much helpful these days.
Thank you. I want to be respectful of your time, and I think this was the time we had allotted. I'm getting a wave off stage. Do you have time for one more?
Oh yeah, sure, of course. It's your conference.
Let's stay here.
So.
I think, thank you, Ed. I think I'm wanting to hear from you about your own process of wellness and connection to activism and advocacy. And I know I just really loved the most recent introduction to your autobiography, your reflection back on your own perspective shifts and the way in which you talk about what you knew at the time being what was available to you. This concept of historical immaturity is just I just really appreciate that language. Thank you. And thinking about how we might grow and develop, and that growth and learning and engagement with organizing or politicized thought might itself be a wellness strategy or part of being a full person. How has that turned up in your life? Do you see this as part of your own wellness?
Well, yeah. Thank you for your questions. They've been really interesting. And yeah, you know, it's very instructive to grow old. You know, especially when, as a young person, you never imagine yourself at 80. But I do have to tell you that my mother's closest friend, and a woman whom I've known all of my life, literally all of my life, and an activist, a communist, a black woman communist, I just had the opportunity to celebrate her 110th birthday with her.
Happy birthday.
She's like a super centenarian. And so I've learned a great deal from her. You know, how it is that she manages to always be present and to think deeply and critically, and how she made it to 110. And I realized that in all of the many years that I've known her, all of the 81 years of my life, because she and my mother were pregnant at the same time. So I've known her since before I was born. But she always manages to find a place for herself amongst the generation that is doing important political work. So she has always had friends of all generations, very young friends and very old friends. And I've tried to sort of follow in her footsteps, I suppose. And I recognize that our knowledge does not belong to us as individuals. It doesn't belong to us as a generation. It's collective. And so, therefore, let me put it this way. I not only, as a person who is an elder now, occupy the position of passing down the knowledge and the consciousness, although that too, yes. Because that's our responsibility, to pass down what we know. But perhaps even more important, learning from the youngest generation. Because if you think about that metaphor of standing on the shoulders of those who came before us, if you're standing on the shoulders, it means that you can see a lot further than the person who is your elder. And that's the collectivity of knowledge. It's not that one person knows more than the other. It's just that this is how it works. This is how we as elders and we as young people fit in to the whole process of history. And so, it's very humbling, but it also makes you feel wonderful. It makes you feel as if you are a part of something that is so much larger than yourself. And I think that is what we often miss in this country, because there are people who are in leadership who are constantly encouraging people to be smaller than they can potentially be, not larger, not identify with those who are trying to create a better world. for ever larger numbers of people. And let me just conclude by saying that, freedom doesn't work unless it's shared. Freedom is not an individualistic phenomenon. Freedom can only survive by being offered to ever larger numbers of people. Freedom requires that its reach be ever increasing. And if you don't participate in that process of increasing the reach of freedom, then you're falling on the sidelines of history. And let me conclude with that.
Thank you.